That night, silence didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching me. The house was too still, too quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. I remember standing in the middle of my room, listening to nothing, yet feeling like I wasn't alone at all. I told myself it was just my imagination, just another night of overthinking, but something inside me refused to settle. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something heavier, something that sat in my chest and refused to move, that I was supposed to be alone at home. That's what I kept repeating in my head. But my father was in his room, and my brother was somewhere in the house too. Still, it felt like I was alone in a completely different way, like no one really saw me, no one really knew what was going on inside my head. We lived under the same roof, but it never felt like a home. It felt like a place where people existed next to each other, not with each other. My father had always been distant. Even when he was physically there, it felt like he was somewhere else entirely. Conversations with him were short, dry, and always ended before they really began. He never asked how I felt, never noticed when something was off. It was like emotions didn't exist in his world, and over time, I stopped trying to show mine. You learn to stay quiet when no one listens. My brother was different, or at least that's what I used to think. He was more present, more aware. He would talk, sometimes even joke, and for a while, I believed that meant something. But there was always something I couldn't explain, something subtle in the way he looked at me sometimes, or the way his tone would shift without warning. It wasn't obvious enough to question, but it was enough to make me pause. I ignored it, like we all ignore things that don't make sense. Yet, that night, everything felt sharper. The ticking of the clock echoed louder than usual. Every small sound carried weight, like it meant something more than it should. I sat on my bed, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything, just trying to distract myself from that feeling. But it didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. I tried to think back, to figure out when this feeling first started. It wasn't just that night. It had been building slowly, quietly, like something hiding in plain sight. Small moments I brushed off. A pause that lasted too long. A look that felt too intense. A silence that didn't feel normal. At the time, they didn't seem important. But now, when I thought about them, they felt connected somehow, like pieces of something I hadn't fully seen yet. I remember one moment clearly. It was nothing, really, just a normal day. But the way my brother stood a little too close, the way he didn't move even when I stepped back, it stayed with me. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That I was overthinking. That's what I always did, turned doubt into silence, questions into excuses. The truth is, I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. It's easier to ignore discomfort than to face it, especially when it comes from the people you're supposed to trust. So I stayed quiet. I convinced myself everything was normal, even when it didn't feel like it. That night, though, it was different. The air felt heavier. I could hear faint movement somewhere in the house, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. It wasn't loud enough to be clear, just enough to make me aware that I wasn't as alone as I wanted to be. I held my breath for a moment, listening closely, but the sound stopped as suddenly as it started. I stood up slowly, my heart beating faster for no reason I could explain. I told myself to relax, that it was nothing, but my body didn't believe it. There's a difference between what you think and what you feel, and in that moment, my thoughts had no control. I walked toward the door and paused. Something about stepping outside my room didn't feel right, like I was about to walk into something I wasn't ready to see. I don't know why I felt that way. There was no clear reason, no evidence, just a feeling that sat deep inside me. I stayed there for a few seconds, hand on the handle, trying to calm myself down. I almost laughed at myself. What was I even afraid of? It was my own house. My own family. There was nothing to be scared of, at least that's what I kept telling myself, but then I remembered the way things had been lately. The strange silences. The unspoken tension. The moments that didn't make sense but didn't feel right either. And suddenly, that feeling came back stronger than before. I stepped back from the door. For the first time, I didn't feel safe in my own home. And the worst part was, I didn't even know why. I just knew something wasn't right. Something I couldn't see yet, something I couldn't explain, but something that was definitely there. That I sat back down, staring at nothing, trying to convince myself it would pass. That it was just another night, just another thought that would disappear by morning. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore anymore. That I thought I was imagining things, but that night was only the beginning. It didn't stop after that night. If anything, it became harder to ignore. The silence in the house changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it felt loaded, like something was always about to happen but never fully did. I started noticing things I had ignored before, things that didn't seem like coincidences anymore. My brother began showing up more often around me. Not in an obvious way, not enough for anyone else to question it, but enough for me to feel it. He would walk into a room and stay longer than necessary, say things that didn't quite fit, watch me in a way that made me aware of myself. It wasn't aggressive or clear, just persistent. Like he was testing boundaries without ever crossing them completely. At first, I told myself I was reading too much into it. That maybe he was just being normal and I was the one making it strange. That's how it starts, confusion turning into self-doubt. Every time something felt off, I found a way to explain it away. Every time my instincts told me something wasn't right, I convinced myself they were wrong, but there were moments I couldn't shake. Moments that stayed in my mind longer than they should have. A simple conversation that felt too intense. A look that lasted a second too long. A silence that didn't feel comfortable. None of it was enough to point at directly, but together, it created a feeling I couldn't escape. Why father didn't notice anything. Or maybe he did and chose not to see it. He stayed the same, distant, disconnected, existing in his own world. If anything was changing in the house, it wasn't reaching him. And that made everything worse. It meant there was no one to turn to, no one to confirm whether what I was feeling was real or just in my head. That I started avoiding being alone in certain parts of the house. Not in an obvious way, just small adjustments. Choosing different rooms, keeping doors slightly open, staying where I felt less exposed. I didn't even fully understand why I was doing it. It was instinct more than logic, but no matter how much I tried to adjust, that feeling followed me. It wasn't tied to a specific place or moment anymore. It was constant, sitting in the back of my mind, growing stronger with time. There was one moment that changed everything, even if I didn't admit it right away. It was subtle, like everything else, but this time it felt different. He said something simple, something that could have been harmless in any other context, but the way he said it, it didn't feel right. There was a weight behind it, an intention I couldn't ignore. That I didn't respond the way I normally would. I paused. And in that pause, everything felt exposed. For a second, it was like we both knew something had shifted. Like whatever line had been there before was no longer as clear. That I laughed it off, of course. That's what I always did. Turn discomfort into something lighter, something dismissible. But inside, something had already changed. I couldn't pretend I didn't notice anymore. After that, the tension became harder to hide. Not openly, not in a way anyone else would see, but in small, quiet ways. I became more aware of his presence, more aware of the space between us, more aware of every interaction. And the more aware I became, the more uncomfortable it felt. That I started questioning everything. Not just him, but myself. Why didn't I say anything? Why didn't I react? Why was I still trying to convince myself it was nothing? The answers were simple, even if I didn't want to admit them. Because saying something would make it real. And if it was real, then everything would change. So I stayed silent, but silence has a way of making things worse. It gives space for thoughts to grow, for doubts to turn into something heavier. And that's exactly what happened. What started as a feeling turned into a certainty I didn't want. The house felt smaller now. Every room carried that same tension, that same unspoken weight. I couldn't relax, couldn't fully breathe, couldn't shake the sense that I was stuck in something I didn't understand, and the worst part was, nothing had happened in a way I could clearly point to. There was no single moment I could use to justify how I felt. Just a series of small things that, together, created something much bigger. That's what made it so difficult. It wasn't clear. It wasn't obvious. It lived in the spaces between actions, in the things that weren't said out loud, but deep down, I knew this wasn't normal, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, that truth wasn't going away. I couldn't carry it quietly anymore. The weight of not knowing had turned into something worse than the truth itself. Every thought circled back to the same question, every moment stretched thin with tension. I stopped pretending things were normal because nothing felt normal anymore. Even breathing in that house felt different, like the air itself had changed, and I started paying closer attention, not out of curiosity but out of necessity. If something was wrong, I needed to understand it. I couldn't keep living in uncertainty, constantly questioning what I felt. So I listened more, watched more, noticed things I used to ignore. And once I allowed myself to see clearly, the patterns became impossible to deny. That it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the space between all of us. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room. The way silence would fall too quickly, too deliberately. My father's presence felt even more distant now, almost like he was avoiding something rather than just being unaware. That realization hit harder than anything else. Because if he knew, then this wasn't just in my head. One night, everything came together in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I was ready for. It just happened, like all the pieces decided to fall into place at once. I heard voices, low, controlled, but tense. Not loud enough to be a clear argument, but not calm either. There was something underneath the tone, something strained that I didn't mean to listen, but I didn't walk away either. At first, it didn't make sense. The words were incomplete, fragmented, like I was only hearing parts of something much bigger. But even those parts were enough. Enough to make my chest tighten, enough to make my hands go still. There was a shift in the way they spoke, something defensive, something careful. And then a silence that felt heavier than anything that had been said before. That silence told me more than words ever could, that I didn't need to hear everything. I didn't need a full explanation that I understood, not in a way I could fully process yet, not in a way that felt real, but enough to know that whatever was happening wasn't imagined. It wasn't just subtle tension or misunderstood moments. It was something deeper, something hidden, something that had been there longer than I realized, and why mine tried to reject it immediately. Tried to find another explanation, something that made more sense, something that didn't break everything I thought I knew. But there was nothing else it could be. The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, without asking permission, and once it's there, it refuses to leave. That I stepped away before I heard more. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I already knew enough. Staying any longer would only make it harder to breathe, harder to hold myself together. Everything felt unreal after that. The walls, the rooms, even my own thoughts. I moved through the house like I didn't belong there anymore, like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time. Nothing had physically changed, but everything felt different. That I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a version of it that hurt less. But every version led back to the same place, a betrayal, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. And the worst part wasn't just what it meant, it was how long it had been there without me fully seeing it. How many moments I had ignored, how many signs I had explained away, how many times I chose silence over questions. That realization hit harder than the truth itself. That I wasn't just shocked. I was angry. Not just at them, but at myself. For not trusting what I felt earlier, for staying quiet when something didn't feel right, for convincing myself that discomfort was normal. That I wanted to confront them right then, to force everything into the open, to hear it said out loud instead of living in this half-hidden reality. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but the understanding that once I said something, there would be no going back. Some truths change everything the moment they're spoken. That I stayed in my room, staring at the same spot for what felt like hours. My mind kept moving, but my body didn't. It was like I was stuck between two choices, neither of them feeling right. Say something and break whatever was left of this family. Or stay silent and keep living in something that was already broken. Neither option felt like a way out. That's when it really hit me. There was no version of this where things stayed the same. No way to pretend anymore, no way to go back to not knowing. Whether I spoke or stayed quiet, the damage was already done. That I wasn't deciding if things would change, that I was deciding how, and that choice felt heavier than anything I had faced before. That I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, but it didn't help. The truth doesn't disappear just because you don't look at it. It stays, waiting, pressing against every thought until you have no choice but to face it. That I knew what was coming next. I could feel it building, like everything had been leading to this point from the beginning, that I had reached the edge of something I couldn't step back from, and now, I had to choose, because whatever I did next, it was going to destroy everything. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts pulled me back into everything I had been avoiding for years. Not just what happened a few hours ago, but everything beneath it. The silence in my marriage, the slow fading of connection, the way I had learned to exist without being seen. By the time the morning light started creeping in, something inside me felt different. Not better, not healed, but clearer. The confusion had settled into something more solid. I wasn't questioning what I felt anymore. I wasn't trying to minimize it or push it aside. I was finally facing it without excuses. That I got up and moved through the house slowly, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The untouched dinner from the night before, the empty side of the bed, the quiet that no longer felt temporary. It felt permanent now, like a truth I had been living with but refusing to name. My phone was still in my hand when it buzzed again, another message from my husband: busy morning. We'll call later. I stared at it, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately. I didn't feel that familiar urge to maintain something that was already falling apart. Instead, I set the phone down and let the message sit there unanswered. That version of me, the one who kept adjusting, waiting, excusing, felt distant now. That I walked to the door and stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the handle. The memory of the night before flickered through my mind, but it didn't freeze me this time. It didn't control me. It just reminded me of something important, that I had ignored my instincts for too long. That I opened the door, stepping outside into the quiet morning. The air felt different. Still, but not suffocating. I glanced toward my neighbor's house without meaning to. Everything looked normal. No sign of what had happened. No indication that anything was different, but I knew better. That I turned away and went back inside, closing the door behind me with intention this time. Not out of fear, but out of decision. There was a difference. That I picked up my phone again and opened my messages. My husband's name sat at the top, familiar but distant. I didn't hesitate this time. I think we need to talk, I typed. That I stared at the message for a second before sending it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. But it carried everything I hadn't been saying. That a few minutes passed before he replied. About what? I let out a quiet breath, not out of frustration, but out of realization. That question alone said more than anything else. About us, I responded. This time, the delay was longer. When his reply finally came, it was shorter than I expected. Okay. That was it. No urgency. No concern. Just acknowledgement, and somehow, that made things even clearer. That I sat down, holding the phone loosely, and let myself feel everything without stopping it. The disappointment, the anger, the sadness. Not just from last night, but from everything that came before it. That I thought about the version of myself who kept hoping things would change. The one who believed that patience and silence would somehow fix what was broken. I saw her clearly now, and for the first time, I understood that she wasn't weak. She was just tired of being alone, but I wasn't going to be her anymore. The rest of the day moved quietly, but not heavily. I didn't rush to clean or distract myself. I didn't try to make things feel normal. I let the reality sit exactly as it was. When my husband finally called, I answered. His voice sounded the same. Calm, slightly distracted. Like this was just another conversation. What's going on? He asked. That I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence sit for a second before speaking. I'm not okay, I said simply. There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but noticeable. What do you mean? I could have explained everything in detail. I could have told him about last night, about how it made me feel, about how it connected to everything else. But I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about explaining. That it was about being honest. I've been alone for a long time, I said. Even when you're here. Another pause. Longer this time. That's not fair, he replied. That I almost smiled, not out of humor, but out of recognition. That response used to make me doubt myself. It used to make me step back, soften my words, question my feelings, but not anymore. It's the truth, I said calmly. The conversation didn't turn into an argument. It didn't explode the way I thought it might. Instead, it revealed something quieter, something more final, that a disconnect that had been there all along. That we talked, but not in a way that fixed anything. It wasn't about solutions anymore. It was about acknowledgement. About finally saying things out loud that had been building for years. When the call ended, I didn't feel relief, but I didn't feel trapped either. That I sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle around me again. But this time, it wasn't the same kind of silence. It didn't feel like something I was stuck in. That it felt like something I could move through. That night changed something in me. Not because of what happened, but because of what it forced me to see. The truth I had been avoiding didn't feel distant anymore. It felt undeniable. That I wasn't just reacting to one moment. That I was waking up to everything, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next.